Hello, this is Environmental Psychology Part 8, the development of an offshore wind scale, a class project. My name is Sean Duffy and I'm a professor at Rutgers Camden, and this is part of a project that is through the New Jersey Offshore Wind Initiative at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Now, this module is slightly different than any of the others that I've presented before because what this module is dealing with is a lesson plan, or at least a project that I developed for my course that I taught in the spring of 2023. That's applied statistics. So if you're an educator, this might be of interest to you, but if you're interested more in the results of a actual offshore wind scale, that will be presented in Module 9, which will be uploaded sometime either later this summer or in the fall of 2023. There are a few steps that remain before I can actually conduct the study, such as get IRB approval, but that will be more interesting to those that are interested in actually having a survey instrument that they could use for investigating offshore wind. But this is describing a class project in a statistics class. But you might be interested in this anyway, so feel free to watch. So, just as a little bit of background, when I was asked to do these modules and these lessons, I went to a conference in early January 2023 and to a network event in Philadelphia in February 2023 where I met other scholars that do work in this sector of wind. And in my conversations with a lot of these individuals, no one seemed to know of any scale publicly available out there that taps into people's attitudes, knowledge, thoughts about offshore wind. Now, having done a little bit of research, I knew that there was some material out there on terrestrial onshore wind turbines, but much less is known about offshore wind. And I'd argue that there are differences that we need to consider. We're talking about the shore. I think the people that live coastal lives think about the shore differently than people who live inland. I think that questions such as the effects of noise probably play a greater role in concerns about terrestrial wind turbines than those that are offshore. So I thought that it might be very interesting to use this as an opportunity to teach classes that I was teaching. I think there was a total of maybe 75 students in two sections of statistics. That it would be a great opportunity to teach my students about how to do this kind of research and learn a bit about offshore wind in the process. So as I said, in spring 2023, I was assigned these two sections of this applied statistics course. I thought this would be a great idea to a learning tool. And when I presented this to the students, they were all excited. Many of them didn't know anything about offshore wind, and they didn't know about the initiatives in New Jersey towards promoting offshore wind. So our first step was to, in class, form focus groups where we probed in smaller groups what students knew about, thought about, and felt about offshore wind. Now, the unfortunate thing about this was that the students themselves seemed to be relatively unopinionated, uninformed, and kind of apathetic as a whole. Now, it's worth mentioning that, I'm teaching in the Rutgers Camden campus. It's probably the campus that is furthest from the Jersey Shore. So, in the day-to-day lives of most of my students, offshore wind is probably an issue that just doesn't come up on the regular. So what I did is I designed an assignment in which I asked the students to go out in their friends and their family and do an informal focus group where they would sit people down and ask them what they thought as a homework assignment about offshore wind. And note that this assignment was dealing more with qualitative. This wasn't a quantitative assignment. This was sort of teaching students how do you begin to design a survey instrument at all. Now, This process resulted in a variety of opinions that ran the gamut of people's thoughts and feelings about wind. Um, Here are some responses that the students came up with in their interviews of people who they knew. I love the idea. I think those windmills are beautiful. Another person said, we need to be energy independent, so I support them. Another individual said, I hear that they will create lots of jobs, especially for welders, which is what I do. And finally, if it will help beat climate change, I might not like them, but I'll live with them. So it seems as if individuals were interested in this, and lots of positive responses. I was actually surprised at the number of positive responses in the focus groups that students held. But there were other responses that were less favorable. For one, it's going to ruin tourism at the shore. A second one, this actually was the most common response. Don't they kill the whales and birds? A third, my relative is, again, I took out the name of this individual. I de-identified all of the stuff that I'm talking about here. My relative is a part of the group that's trying to kill them, meaning kill the wind turbines. Another response, they only benefit China. Another, don't they explode and burn on fire? And then finally, total waste of government money. We have potholes, and here we are worrying about wind. So these are, again, there are positive and negative responses to this idea of offshore wind. So my next step in this assignment was to have the class break up into groups, concatenate all the data that everyone collected, which were several hundred responses, and then apply a kind of a content analysis to the responses to come up with a way of summarizing how the data ended up. So by which I mean, I wanted students to together sort of group the different responses into different categories so that one can think about, is there a category of biological concerns where people are concerned about animal life, or economic concerns where people are interested in the effect on the economy, or aesthetic concerns where people are worried about the visual impact of having wind turbines in the distance. So I had them break into groups and to try to do this, and after 45 minutes we discussed what each group came up with, and after class I had each student come up with an individualized reports as to what they've learned from their informal focus groups and their interviews. So again, this was sort of a trying to get them to think a little bit about what they did and how they came up with all of this information. So some of the groups and students came up with dimensions that included biospheric, altruistic, and egocentric concerns that seemed to be based on Schultz's framework, 2001. I assigned that paper as well. Some other groups came up with impact on animals, impact on tourism, impact on humans. Other groups came up with dimensions like ecological concerns, economic concerns, egocentric concerns. But there was a fairly high agreement between groups about what dimensions were falling out from this qualitative analysis. Now, of course, again, if we were doing this in a quantitative fashion, I would be teaching them factor analysis and we'd be using other techniques. But this was just a qualitative first step in the design of a survey. So in the following week, we discussed the principles of survey design and analysis. Again, this is a class that's tries to teach students applied statistics. So this is a good place to teach sort of the steps that go into collecting this kind of data. We also discussed what kind of demographic factors might matter, things like gender, age, political affiliation. We also discussed what kind of contextual factors might matter. People who live closer to the shore might have stronger opinions or might lean one way or the other versus people that live farther from the shore. Or people who actually visit the shore multiple times a summer might be more concerned than those that rarely go to the shore at all. And we also discussed some psychological factors that might matter, such as attitudes about conservation, individual versus collective efficacy, altruistic, biospheric, egocentric environmental concerns. We opted in the end to do a more limited survey that had demographic questions and some questions about the Likert scale questions which, if those of you that might not know what a Likert scale is, it's if you've ever taken a survey and they ask you on a scale of 1, with 1 meaning something like I disagree, to 7, with 7 meaning I agree, rank on that scale of 1 to 7 to what extent you agree or disagree. So that's a Likert scale. So we came up with a set of these that fell out of the concerns that the students came up with. So we did this as part of a class, all of us together. And I put it together as an actual survey using Google Forms, which Google Forms is a program that if you have a Google account, you can use to do surveys that one can provide people with a link, and then they can fill out the survey online. It's a very useful way of collecting a lot of data without having to, use paper. I mean, in the old days, we used to actually send people out with clipboards and paper, but then you'd have to enter all of that data in by hand. By using something like Google Forms, you can collect data very quickly and efficiently. So based on these qualitative results, we developed the survey. And if you want to actually visit the survey and see it, the link is right here. That's the survey. And the Likert scale questions were based on responses that the focus group came up with. So certain questions dealt with economic impacts in tourism, aesthetic impacts and visual effects, marine life and avian life, national security and international trade, and these are not exhaustive. One of the things that you realize as an educator is that you also don't want to overwhelm your students, and you also don't want to overwhelm your research volunteers that are volunteering to be a part of this study. Now, in this study, what I had students do is I had them go out and ask not the people that they had asked previously, but ask a new set of people to fill out this survey. And so that was sort of a way for them to collect data that we would have data to work with, so that they could, actually analyze data as a group and as part of a homework assignment. So that was the purpose of having them do this. Now, I had each student get responses from just 2 people. And if you want to look at the responses are at this link here. There's no identifying information within this data set. I didn't ask people for emails or for names. So it's a de-identified data set. And the reason why I can do this without getting IRB approval is that this is part of a class project that is part of an everyday educational kind of thing. Nothing in here is, you would not be able to identify any subject by the responses. I made sure to design the survey that way. Now, some considerations that I want to put in is that having students actually design and carry out a study teaches them very important things. A lot of what statisticians have to deal with is cleaning data. And so when you get a raw data set, certain people only get through half of the survey, then they close their browser, and so you only get a certain set of the responses. Other situations, you have people that provide nonsensical responses. So for instance, in this study, one subject claimed that their gender was polar bear, because I gave the option for subjects that if they didn't want to answer male or female, they could identify something in writing. So I don't know. I mean, maybe this subject did think that their gender is polar bear, but again, I think that the more logical assumption here is that someone wasn't taking the survey seriously. In fact, there's actually in survey research and experimental research in general, there's something called the screw you effect, where people agree to do a study, but then they do it in such a way that is, just sarcastic or joking, not taking it seriously. And, what I tell them from the beginning of this class is that data cleaning is one of the most important skills that they can learn being researchers, because all data sets that they get are invariably going to have a problem in them. There might be, in one case, the word male might be capitalized, and in another case, it might be in lowercase, and statistical analysis programs might view those two things as different, and that could affect the analysis. So you have to be very careful when you do these projects, and so that's a really important thing for them to learn. So I had them go through and clean the data, get rid of the polar bear subject and so on. And let me give you some of the results that they came up with. So here are some demographic results. We had here, you can see on the index at the top right there, female, male, non-binary, and polar bear. Most people identified as being a male or female, and for subsequent analyses, we took out polar bear and non-binary simply because there's not enough non-binary to make it its own group that we could analyze as a unique sort of category of people. The next, the age range. So we asked participants what their age was. Of course, when you ask students to collect data on people, most students have friends that are of a similar age to them, so the vast majority of subjects in the study were between the age of 18 and 30. Again, this is just a student project. If you're interested in the real study that I'm putting together, the next module is going to have the real data. But this is just sort of like a class project data. And you can see that most of the participants, again, were of a limited age range. How far from the coast do you live? So less than 10 miles, 10 to 30 miles, 30 to 50 miles, or more than 50 miles. Most students here, subjects live between 30 and 50 miles. So that was the most common response. How frequently do you visit Jersey Shore? Less than once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 or more, or I never have been to the Jersey Shore. So you can see that we're getting variability in these responses, which is really great, that there are, some people who are, you want to have variability when you're putting together a survey like this. How long do you stay at the Jersey Shore? A day or less, a day, 2 days, between a day or 2 days and 7 days, and so on. So again, that's an important thing to know. I mean, people who might just stop by the shore once every 5 years might care much less about the presence of, wind turbines than someone who might, be frequently there and might live close to it. And so what we have here are some of the results of the Likert scales. On a scale of 1 to 7, with 1 meaning completely disagree and 7 meaning completely agree, how well would you agree with the following statement? I believe the Jersey Shore to be a beautiful natural environment. I'm sorry, but the way in which I copied these cut off the entire statement. But if, again, you want to look at the entire statement, you can always go back to that slide that has a link to the actual survey, and you can see the survey in its entirety. And you can see here that the vast majority are, answering higher than the midpoint of the scale. So people are saying that they believe, they completely agree or agree that the Jersey Shore is a beautiful natural environment. Fewer people are answering 1, 2, or 3 that they don't believe that it's a beautiful natural environment. So with 1 being completely disagree and 7 meaning completely agree, how well would you agree with the following statement? I believe that we should go forward with offshore wind technology. And again, here we find that there's variability, but the majority of people, respondents, are saying that they believe that New Jersey should go forward. With, again, the next question, on a scale of 1 to 7, with 1 meaning completely disagree and 7 meaning completely agree, how well would you agree with the following statement? I believe that New Jersey should not further development offshore wind. Now, again, when you compare this to the last slide, this is what we call positive and negative keyed items, where you want to see that people are responding in a way that's consistent with the statements. So here, the majority are disagreeing with that statement that New Jersey should not pursue wind. So that's a good thing that people seem to be taking this seriously. Again, as a survey researcher, you would want to look and see that individual subjects are consistent in their answers. There's something that's called acquiescence bias, where people just answer 5, 5, 5, 5, 5 without ever reading any of the questions. And you use these sort of negative and positive keyed questions to sort of identify participants that might not be answering in a way which is logically consistent. So here, another question. On a scale of 1 to 7, with 1 meaning completely disagree and 7 meaning completely agree, how well would you agree with the following statement? I believe the development of offshore wind technology will have a negative impact on tourism. And what we find is that most participants are answering this question disagreeing, where they think that there won't be a negative impact on tourism. Now, on a scale of 1 to 7, with 1 meaning completely disagree and 7 meaning completely disagree, how well would you agree with the following statement? I'm concerned about the effects of offshore wind development on marine life, such as fish or dolphins or whales. And you can see that there are a lot of concerns about this. It's important to note that in the popular news media in New Jersey, right before this survey commenced, there were a lot of news stories about whales perishing in the close to the Jersey shore, and a lot of the people who were writing about this were claiming that this had to do with the ships that were surveying the seabed, interrupting the way in which whales communicate. Now, again, there are reasons to believe that that is not the case, and that other things, such as climate change, are causing whales to seek prey in regions that they usually wouldn't or traditionally wouldn't go, and that confuses them, and also more likely to be lots of shipping interactions. So, but the fact is that because this was salient in the news media, it's the case that this was something that people were really concerned about, which is valid to be concerned about if you've been hearing about it on the news. On the same scale of 1 to 7, concerned about the effects on avian life. Again, that's another thing that people have heard by politicians and by other people, is that birds sometimes fly into these wind turbines. And while that may be true, certainly, as I said in another module, there are other things that kill birds at a much higher rate than wind turbines. But it's something that people are concerned about. Wind technology on our energy infrastructure. People seem to be across the board. And so there's not consistency in their responses here. Offshore wind technology on national security. People are not concerned about the effect on national security. So that's a good thing. So it's not something that people are worried about. I mean, I think that some people in the press have been concerned about the fact that these wind turbines might interfere with naval vessels or with Air Force planes, but that doesn't seem to be a concern by the people that we surveyed. On our economic livelihood, again, most people seem to not be concerned about the effect on the economic livelihood. So these are just some of the questions that we asked, and I don't want to show you this too much because it wasn't. First off, I would have reworded the survey. When we put it together as a class, I sort of had them vote on how to word the survey, and they came up with this wording. I think that asking how well would you agree with, I think that a better way is how well does this describe you? But when I sometimes let students put things together in their own way because it makes them feel like they have some agency over it, and so I didn't really kind of correct them about this. But if I were to do this as a real survey, I wouldn't word it the same way. But this, again, was just a class exercise that I'm telling you about, those of you that are interested in maybe doing this on your own. And again, you might be interested in doing this on a topic that's of your own interest or, in your own community. So I just think that this is a useful thing to have a module about. So far what I've shown you are the results, but the next step that I had them do is to use these data to do inferential techniques. Descriptive statistics are what we've talked about before, where we're talking about what's the average response. But when we do inferential statistics, what we're trying to do is to make the argument that based on the data that we collected and the sample that we have, to what extent does this describe the actual population of people who we're aiming to sort of represent with our sample? So those of you that teach statistics, you might be interested in this. Those of you that haven't had statistics in 20 years, you might want to skip over this. But the point I want to make is, so I had them do this to learn chi-square, to learn t-tests, analysis of variance or ANOVA, and regression and correlation, which is kind of where this introductory level course stopped. And here are some examples of some results. We used in this class a program called Jamovi, which is a free program that you can download on your computer, or you can do it, analyze online, using what's called the Jamovi Cloud, which you see on the left down there, or Jamovi Desktop. It's a free program that comes out of the Netherlands, which operates a lot like SPSS, and in the sense that you have a data editor on screen. You can see that if you look in the center of the screen there, you can see the sort of spreadsheet part. Other programs like, there's another one called JASP, don't allow you to have that on screen. And I think it's helpful to have the data in front of you, the raw data. So I really like this program. I recommend you try it out. It's free. It doesn't take up a lot of memory, and you can do almost any analysis using it, because it actually ties into R, the programming language. And so you could do anything really using this particular language, this program. So the first one I'll demonstrate is chi-square. Chi-square is a nonparametric test that looks at proportions in your data. So what I did here is an analysis where I looked at, with the students, the proportion of males versus females on their marital status. Not for any other reason than just to demonstrate this test. And it provides you with, at the table at the top, provides you with the number of respondents that are of each category, and then below it gives you the result of the chi-square analysis, which shows you the probability of this being due to chance. And the screen that I'm looking at right now is so small that I can't see whether or not it's significant or not, but I'm going to fly through these because the results here aren't really important. I'm just demonstrating what I did with the class. Next, we did a t-test here. I believe that this was a t-test of gender on one of the questions that were asked. And here it provides you with the analysis table as well. Regression, which is a test that gives you, if you have two continuous variables, it tells you what's the equation of the line that goes through those variables. And that one is useful for prediction. And so I just took two of the Likert scale questions that we asked and did the regression on it. It was, interesting results. And then ANOVA. What ANOVA allows us to do is to compare the averages of different subgroups here. So I believe what I did in this one was to look at people who were in a committed relationship, single, divorced, or married, and to see if their average on one of the questions was statistically significant, like the group's average difference. And so that's what's presented there. This isn't really important for the purpose of, here I don't want to even give the results necessarily, but the point is to show you what I did with the class. And so it wasn't just the idea of doing the survey, but it was doing the post-survey analyses that are necessary for coming up with conclusions. So once the class reached its end on the last day before the exam, I gave them a little survey that I wanted to ask them a few questions about whether or not they enjoyed this exercise. So I gave it on again, a Likert scale, on a scale of 1 with completely disagree to 7 completely agree. I found this to be an interesting project. The results were 6.2 out of 7. Felt I learned how to apply statistics, 6.1 out of 7. Feel that I know more about offshore wind, 5.8 out of 7. Would recommend this project in the future, 6.1 out of 7. And found that this project added to the class experience, 6.0 out of 7. So in general, the students seemed to like doing this, and I had a lot of fun with it, and they seemed to enjoy it as well. So I think that coming up with a real-world project and a real-world problem that is contemporary, that is meaningful, and that has an impact on the future might be a really positive thing to do in all of your statistics classes. So I invite you to, if you want to reuse some of the surveys that I've come up with, feel free to do that. And hopefully learn something from this. I learned, and I think the students learned as well. So in this part, we have demonstrated or described a unique class assignment for a statistics course, although this could in principle be used in any introductory research methods classes or a behavior science course also. Through the use of qualitative data, we developed a quantitative survey about offshore wind, and then ran the quantitative survey as a class project and found unique and novel opinions about offshore wind. So I thought this was really useful. So I guess I wanted to put this here because it's kind of fun and interesting. But these are, there was a group in Rutgers, New Brunswick of students that put together these TikTok videos. Now, TikTok is a video sharing platform that's popular in the early 2020s that allows people to present short videos online and share them with an audience. So Rutgers had a group of students that put together a bunch of videos on offshore wind and wind energy in general, really. And so what I have in the PowerPoint slide are links to a few of these videos. I think that they're pretty cute. And I think that this is one of those ways where you can get students involved and interested. Because, again, I'm an old guy. So, the kinds of places where I learn things are different than where, young people are learning things. So I think that, these are just cool to look at and to learn a little bit from. And they do good videography. And so I hope that you enjoy them as part of this module.